I never thought a propane tank would become my weapon of choice. But when you live in a homeowners association run by people who treat bylaws like the Ten Commandments, you learn to get creative with your revenge. My name is Frank Yates, and I run a commercial refrigeration delivery and installation business in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's honest work, been doing it for 15 years now, and I've built a solid reputation for quality service and punctuality. My wife Sarah and I bought our house in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision 3 years ago, thinking we'd found the perfect place to settle down. The neighborhood looked pristine with its manicured lawns and identical mailboxes, and the HOA seemed reasonable enough at first glance. That was before I met Linda Patterson, the HOA president who made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. The trouble started in early January, during one of those brutal Michigan cold snaps where the temperature drops to 10 below zero, and the wind chill makes it feel like you're living on another planet. I had a delivery scheduled for a commercial client downtown, a restaurant that needed a new walk-in freezer installed before their health inspection the following week. My delivery van, a white Ford Transit with my company logo on the side, was parked in my driveway where it always was. I'd been parking it there since we moved in, never had a problem with anyone. That morning, I walked outside at 6:30 with my thermos of coffee, ready to load up some tools and head out for the installation. The sky was still dark, and my breath came out in visible puffs. That's when I saw her, Linda Patterson, standing at the end of my driveway with her arms crossed over her puffy winter coat. She was probably in her late 40s, with that particular haircut that seemed to be regulation issue for HOA board members, short and severely styled. Her face had that pinched expression of someone who'd been sucking on lemons for breakfast. "Good morning, Linda," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I'd learned early on that being friendly with her was pointless, but I tried to maintain basic civility. "Mr. Yates, we need to discuss your vehicle situation," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Her voice had that nasal quality that made everything sound like a complaint. My vehicle situation. I looked at my van, confused. What about it? Commercial vehicles are not permitted to be parked in residential driveways per HOA regulations, Section 12, subsection 4. I've mentioned this to you before. This was news to me. Linda, you've never mentioned anything about my van. I've been parking it here for 3 years. Well, I'm mentioning it now. The board had a meeting last week, and we've decided to enforce this rule more strictly. You'll need to park that van elsewhere starting immediately. I felt my jaw tighten. I have a delivery scheduled in 45 minutes. A client is depending on me. I'll look into the rules tonight, but right now, I need to get to work. I'm afraid I can't let you leave, Linda said, and that's when I noticed her car, a silver Lexus SUV, was parked directly behind my van, blocking it in completely. Are you serious right now? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You're blocking me in. I need you to understand the severity of this violation. The HOA takes these matters very seriously. We have standards to maintain in this neighborhood. Linda, move your car. I have a business to run and a client waiting. We can discuss this later, but right now, you're interfering with my livelihood. And you're interfering with the property values of everyone in this neighborhood by parking that eyesore in your driveway. She stood her ground, looking pleased with herself. I pulled out my phone and called my client, explaining there was an unexpected delay. They weren't happy, but they understood. Then I called the non-emergency police line. If Linda wanted to play games, I'd handle this by the book. Officer Martinez showed up about 20 minutes later. By then, I was freezing despite my heavy coat, and Linda had retreated to sit in her running car, blasting heat while blocking me in. The officer listened to both sides of the story, looked at the HOA bylaws that Linda had conveniently printed out and highlighted, and then delivered his verdict. "Madam, regardless of HOA rules, you can't block someone's vehicle in their own driveway. That's not how this works. You need to move your car." "But he's in violation of the HOA covenant," Linda protested. "That's a civil matter between him and the HOA. What you're doing right now could be considered harassment or even unlawful restraint. Move your vehicle." Linda's face turned red, but she moved her car, shooting me a look that could have melted steel. I thanked Officer Martinez, loaded up my van, and headed to my job, now running over an hour late. The installation took all day, and I didn't get home until after dark. That night, I dug through all the HOA documents we'd received when we bought the house. I found Section 12, subsection 4. It did mention commercial vehicles, but the wording was vague, referring to commercial trucks over 1-ton capacity, and vehicles used for construction or landscaping services that would create noise or disturbance. My van was a standard half-ton cargo van, and I wasn't running a construction crew out of my driveway. I kept my tools organized in the van, loaded and unloaded quietly, and was generally gone before most of my neighbors were even awake. I drafted an email to the HOA board pointing out the specific language and explaining why I believed my vehicle didn't fall under the restricted category. I sent it off and hoped that would be the end of it. 2 days later, I received a formal notice from the HOA. Not only were they insisting my van violated the rules, but they were also fining me $250 for the violation, with an additional $50 per day until I complied. The notice also mentioned that continued violation could result in legal action and a lien being placed on my property. I couldn't believe it. I called an emergency meeting with the HOA board, which consisted of Linda Patterson as president, a retired dentist named Harold Chen as vice president, and a woman named Susan Wright as secretary. The meeting took place in Linda's living room, which was decorated like a furniture showroom, everything matching and looking like no one actually lived there. "Thank you for meeting with me," I started, trying to remain professional. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the commercial vehicle policy." Linda cut me off immediately. "There's no misunderstanding. Your van is commercial. It has your business name on it, and therefore it can't be parked in a residential driveway. But the bylaw specifically mentions trucks over 1 ton and vehicles creating disturbances. My van is neither." Harold Chen looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers in front of him. "Frank, I see your point, but Linda is right that it does say commercial vehicles. The spirit of the law is to keep the neighborhood looking residential, not commercial. My van is parked in my driveway, not on the street. You can barely see it from the road because of the angle. Who exactly is complaining about it?" "That's confidential," Linda said primly. "But multiple neighbors have expressed concerns. I'd like to know who, considering I've never had a single person mention anything to me directly in 3 years. Susan Wright spoke up for the first time. "Frank, we're just trying to maintain property values. Surely you can understand that. Can't you park it at a storage facility or something? That would cost me several $100s a month, and for what? My van isn't bothering anyone. This is arbitrary enforcement of a rule that doesn't even apply to my situation." The meeting went nowhere. They refused to budge, and I refused to pay the fine or move my van. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres, who'd handled cases like mine before. She reviewed all the documents and agreed that the HOA was overreaching, but she also warned me that fighting them would be expensive and time-consuming. The problem with HOAs, she explained during our consultation, is that they have a lot of power written into the covenants. Even when they're wrong, proving it in court costs money. They're betting you'll give in rather than fight. I'm not giving in, I said firmly. This is ridiculous and I won't be bullied. Rebecca filed a response to the HOA's fine, arguing that my vehicle didn't meet the criteria outlined in their own bylaws. That bought me some time, but it also escalated things with Linda. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed Linda driving past my house multiple times a day, slowing down to look at my van. She started documenting everything with her phone, taking pictures and videos. She sent out an email to all the HOA members about the importance of following community rules, clearly aimed at me, though she didn't mention my name. Several neighbors who I'd always been friendly with started acting distant. Then came the February cold snap. The weather forecast started warning about it days in advance. An Arctic blast moving down from Canada that would bring temperatures down to -15, with wind chills approaching -30. Dangerous cold, the kind that could cause frostbite in minutes and freeze pipes if you weren't careful. The whole city went into preparation mode. Hardware stores sold out of pipe insulation and space heaters. The news warned people to stay inside unless absolutely necessary. My business slowed down during extreme weather like this. Most of my clients postponed installations unless it was an emergency. I spent my time catching up on paperwork and maintenance. Sarah, who worked as a teacher, had the week off because of the cold weather policy at her school. We hunkered down, made sure our furnace was running properly, and watched the temperature drop. That's when I noticed something interesting about Linda Patterson's house. She lived 3 doors down from us, in one of the larger homes in the development. I'd been past it hundreds of times but never paid much attention. During one of my walks to the mailbox, bundled up like I was heading to Antarctica, I saw the propane company's truck leaving her driveway. That caught my attention because most houses in our neighborhood were on natural gas. Propane was less common in our area. Out of curiosity, I looked up property records online that evening. Linda's house had been built in the early 2000s, before the natural gas lines were extended to our subdivision. She had a large propane tank that supplied her heat, hot water, and stove. The tank was one of those big 500-gallon jobs, sitting in her side yard behind some decorative shrubs. I didn't think much of it at first, but then Linda escalated things again. On the 3rd day of the cold snap, when temperatures were at their worst, I came outside to find a bright orange sticker on my van's windshield. It was an official-looking notice from the HOA, stating that my vehicle was in violation and would be towed at my expense if not removed within 24 hours. I was furious. I called Rebecca Torres immediately, but she was out of the office dealing with a family emergency. Her assistant said she'd get back to me as soon as possible. I tried calling Linda, but she didn't answer. I drove to her house and knocked on her door. No answer, though I could see her car in the garage through the window. That evening, I was venting to Sarah about the whole situation. She's doing this deliberately during the coldest week of the year, knowing I can't move the van without finding a storage place, and most places aren't even open in this weather. She wants me to fail to comply so she can tow it. Sarah was making hot chocolate, stirring the pot on our stove. This has gotten out of hand, Frank. Maybe we should just move the van for now, deal with the principle of it later when the weather's better. No, I said, more sharply than I intended. I'm sorry, I don't mean to snap at you, but this is about more than just the van now. Linda is abusing her power, and if I give in, she'll just find something else to harass us about. You know how these HOA tyrants work. Sarah sighed. I know. I just hate seeing you this stressed. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Linda's smug face, her deliberate blocking of my van, her refusal to even listen to reason. I thought about the propane tank at her house. And then, I had an idea that was probably terrible but felt absolutely perfect in my sleep-deprived, frustrated state. Propane delivery companies monitor their customers' usage through electronic gauges installed on the tanks. When the tank gets low, usually around 30% capacity, the company automatically schedules a refill. But those systems aren't perfect. If someone manually reset the gauge or interfered with it, the company wouldn't know the tank was running low until the customer called. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm also not entirely ashamed. The next morning, before dawn, I bundled up in my darkest winter clothes and walked down to Linda's house. The cold was absolutely brutal, the kind that hurt to breathe. The streets were empty. Nobody in their right mind was outside in this weather. Linda's propane tank was exactly where I'd seen it, tucked behind some frozen shrubs on the side of her house facing away from the street. There was a digital gauge mounted on the tank showing the current level. It read 42%, not critically low, but not full either. These tanks could drop pretty fast when it was this cold because the furnace would be running constantly. I pulled out a small screwdriver and carefully removed the panel covering the gauge's electronic components. I'm not an electrician, but I know my way around basic wiring from my work with commercial refrigeration. I found the power connection for the monitoring system and disconnected it, then replaced the panel. The gauge went dark. From the propane company's perspective, they'd lost signal from Linda's tank. That happened sometimes with weather or technical glitches. They'd probably try to ping it remotely a few times, but if it didn't respond, they'd assume a minor malfunction and wait for the customer to call. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. My fingers were numb by the time I finished, even through my gloves. I hurried back to my house, my heart pounding, wondering if anyone had seen me. But the neighborhood remained dark and silent. I knew propane usage varied, but in weather this cold, a house Linda's size running on a tank that was 42% full would probably have about 10 to 14 days before it ran out completely. Maybe less if she was keeping her house extra warm. The cold snap was supposed to last about a week according to forecasts. The next morning, I received an email from Linda stating that a towing company had been scheduled to remove my van the following day if I didn't move it. She'd actually gone ahead and hired a company, despite Rebecca's legal response. I forwarded the email to Rebecca, who called me back within an hour. "This is harassment, Frank. She can't just tow your vehicle without going through proper legal channels. I'm filing an emergency injunction." "Don't worry, they won't be towing anything tomorrow." True to her word, Rebecca got the injunction by end of business that day. I emailed a copy to Linda, copying the entire HOA board. I didn't hear back from her. Days passed. The cold continued, though it started to moderate slightly. Temperatures climbed from -15 to a balmy 5 above zero. I went about my business, parking my van in my driveway like always. Linda continued her surveillance, documenting everything. About a week after I disconnected her propane monitor, I noticed Linda's car leaving early in the morning, heading out of the neighborhood. She was gone for several hours. When she came back, she carried grocery bags into her house. Nothing unusual. 2 days later, on a Sunday morning, I was shoveling the fresh snow from our driveway when I heard shouting from down the street. I looked up to see Linda standing in her front yard, wearing a bathrobe and looking frantic. She was on her phone, pacing back and forth. I couldn't hear what she was saying from that distance, but her body language screamed distress. A few other neighbors had noticed too and were looking out their windows or stepping onto their porches. About an hour later, a propane delivery truck arrived at Linda's house. I watched from my living room window as the driver checked her tank, then went to speak with Linda at her front door. The conversation appeared heated. Linda was gesturing wildly, and the driver kept shaking his head. Eventually, he went back to his truck and left without filling her tank. That evening, I took a walk past Linda's house, just curious about what was happening. Her car was gone again. The next morning, Monday, I saw her leaving early with what looked like luggage in her car. Through conversations with other neighbors over the next few days, I pieced together what had happened. Linda's propane had run out completely Sunday morning. She'd woken up to a cold house and no hot water. When she called the propane company for an emergency delivery, they told her they had no record of her tank being low because their monitoring system showed it was offline. Emergency deliveries during extreme cold weather were expensive and had to be scheduled based on priority. Since their system showed no critical need at her address, they couldn't send someone until Tuesday at the earliest. Linda had tried to get other propane companies to deliver, but everyone was backed up with actual emergencies. Elderly people without heat, families with infants, people with medical needs. A middle-aged woman who could stay elsewhere wasn't a priority. So Linda had packed up and left, presumably to stay with family or at a hotel. Her house sat empty, getting colder by the hour. Michigan law required heat to be maintained in occupied properties during winter to prevent pipes from freezing. In an unoccupied house, homeowners usually set the thermostat to 55 degrees to protect the plumbing. But with no propane, Linda's house had no heat at all. I felt a small twinge of guilt, but then I remembered her blocking my van, her harassment, her abuse of power. She'd been trying to harm my livelihood and cost me thousands of dollars in storage fees or legal costs. This was just karma coming back around. Tuesday came and went. Wednesday morning, I saw a propane truck at Linda's house again. They must have finally delivered her fuel. But Linda's car still wasn't there. The house remained dark. Thursday afternoon, I was working in my garage organizing tools when a car pulled up. It was Harold Chen, the HOA vice president. He got out and approached me with an uncomfortable expression. "Frank, do you have a minute?" he asked. "Sure, Harold. What's up?" He glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. "Look, I wanted to apologize for how things have been handled with your van situation. I've been reviewing the bylaws more carefully, and I think Linda may have overstepped. Your van really doesn't meet the criteria for the restrictions. This was unexpected. I appreciate you saying that, Harold. The thing is, Linda's dealing with some personal issues right now. Her propane ran out during the cold snap, and she had to stay at her sister's place. When she got home today, she discovered her pipes had frozen and burst. There's significant water damage to her house." I tried to look sympathetic while fighting down the satisfaction I felt. "That's terrible. I'm sorry to hear that." "Yeah, it's a mess. She's pretty devastated. Anyway, I wanted to let you know that the HOA is dropping the fines and the towing threats. We're going to revise the commercial vehicle policy to be more specific about what's actually prohibited. Your van will be fine." "That's good news. Thank you for letting me know." Harold nodded and left. I went back inside and told Sarah what had happened. She gave me a concerned look. "Frank, you didn't have anything to do with her propane situation, did you?" "Why would you think that?" I kept my expression neutral. "Because I know you, and I know you've been angry about this whole thing. And the timing seems awfully convenient. Sarah, I'm a refrigeration guy, not a propane specialist. How would I even do something like that?" It wasn't technically a lie. I was asking a question, not making a statement. She studied my face for a long moment, then shook her head. I don't want to know. Just tell me you didn't do anything illegal. I didn't break any laws, I said, which was mostly true. Disconnecting someone's propane monitor was vandalism technically, but proving it would be nearly impossible. And I certainly hadn't stolen anything or directly damaged her property. Sarah let it drop, but I could tell she suspected something. She knew me too well. Over the next few weeks, things in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Linda was dealing with her insurance company and contractors to fix the water damage in her house. It was extensive. Burst pipes in multiple locations, damage to her hardwood floors, ruined drywall, destroyed furniture. The estimate I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain was somewhere around $70,000 in damages. The HOA held a meeting to discuss the commercial vehicle policy. Rebecca Torres attended with me, and we presented our argument about why the policy as written didn't apply to standard cargo vans. Harold Chen and Susan Wright both agreed, and with Linda absent, the vote was unanimous to revise the language. The new policy specifically exempted cargo vans under 1-ton capacity that were used for professional services and stored in garages or driveways, as long as they didn't create noise, pollution, or traffic issues. I thought that would be the end of it. Linda would recover from her disaster. I'd continue parking my van in peace, and we'd all move on with our lives. But I should have known Linda Patterson wouldn't let things go that easily. About a month after the propane incident, I came home from a job to find Linda's car parked in front of my house. She was waiting for me, sitting in her car. As soon as I pulled into my driveway, she got out and approached me. She looked different than the last time I'd seen her. Tired, older somehow. The disaster at her house had clearly taken a toll. "Frank, I need to talk to you," she said. "Linda, how are you doing? I heard about your house. That must be really difficult. It's been a nightmare. I'm still staying at my sister's place while the repairs are being done." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "I wanted to talk to you about something, about the timing of everything that happened." My guard went up immediately. "What about it?" "I've been thinking a lot over the past few weeks, about the whole situation with your van, about how I handled things. I was wrong to be so aggressive about it. I let the power of the HOA position go to my head and I took things too far. I'm sorry. This was not what I'd expected. I appreciate you saying that, Linda. But there's something else." She looked me directly in the eyes. "I had a propane company technician look at my tank's monitoring system after everything happened. He found that it had been disconnected, manually disconnected, right before my tank ran out. My heart started beating faster, but I kept my expression neutral. That's strange." "Do they know what caused it?" The technician said it looked like someone deliberately disabled it. The connections didn't just come loose on their own. Someone unscrewed the panel and disconnected the wiring. "Did you file a police report?" I asked, wondering if I should have Rebecca on speed dial. "No," Linda shook her head, "because I can't prove anything and I don't have any evidence of who might have done it. But the timing is suspicious, don't you think? Right after our conflict about your van, during the worst cold weather, my monitoring system mysteriously stops working. Linda, I don't know what you're implying, but I had nothing to do with your propane situation. I'm sorry you went through that, but it's not my fault. I'm not saying it is. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just wanted you to know that I know something wasn't right. And if someone did deliberately cause this to happen to me, they need to understand the consequences. My insurance has covered most of the damage, but my premiums are going up, and I've been displaced from my home for weeks. This has been traumatic and expensive. I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to what you've been through, but I don't know anything about your propane system. Linda stared at me for another moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I just wanted to have this conversation face to face, and I wanted to apologize for my behavior regarding your van. That was wrong, and I'm working on being a better HOA president moving forward. I appreciate that, Linda. I hope your repairs are finished soon and you can get back to normal. She got back in her car and drove away. I stood in my driveway for a few minutes, thinking about the conversation. She suspected, but she couldn't prove anything. And even if she could, what would she do? File a police report saying someone disconnected her propane monitor. They'd ask if she had any evidence, any witnesses, any concrete reason to suspect anyone specific. She had nothing. Still, the conversation left me unsettled. I hadn't expected her to figure out the monitor had been deliberately disabled. I thought it would just look like a malfunction. That evening, Sarah and I talked about it. I came clean and told her what I'd done. She wasn't happy. Frank, that was incredibly dangerous and irresponsible. What if she couldn't have left? What if she'd been stuck there in the cold? She wasn't stuck. She has a car, money, family. She was fine. She just had to spend a few days somewhere else and deal with some property damage. Property damage that cost her $70,000. And you're talking about it like it's nothing. She was trying to cost me thousands in storage fees and legal fees. She was abusing her power to harass me. So your response was to potentially put her in danger and cause massive damage to her home. How is that okay? We argued about it for a while. Sarah thought I'd gone too far. I thought Linda had gotten what she deserved. Eventually, we agreed to disagree and dropped the subject. Life continued. Spring came, melting the snow and bringing warmer weather. The neighborhood started to come alive again, with people working in their yards and kids playing outside. Linda moved back into her house in late March, once the repairs were finally completed. We saw each other occasionally and exchanged polite nods, but never had another direct conversation about what had happened. The revised commercial vehicle policy was officially adopted by the HOA, and I continued parking my van in my driveway without any issues. Other neighbors who ran businesses from home also benefited from the new, clearer language. It turned out Harold Chen's son had been considering starting a landscaping business and wanted to park his truck at home, which was part of why Harold had been motivated to fix the policy. I thought the whole saga was finally over. But then, in early May, I received a certified letter at my house. It was from a law firm representing Linda Patterson. My stomach dropped as I opened it. The letter stated that Linda was filing a civil lawsuit against me for vandalism, property damage, and emotional distress. She was claiming that I had deliberately disabled her propane monitoring system, causing her to run out of fuel during dangerous cold weather, which led to frozen pipes, extensive water damage, and emotional trauma from being displaced from her home. She was seeking compensatory damages for her increased insurance premiums, her deductible costs, rental expenses for staying elsewhere, and punitive damages for emotional distress. The total amount she was seeking was $150,000. I immediately called Rebecca Torres. She reviewed the lawsuit and gave me her assessment. This is going to be very difficult for her to prove. She needs to show that you actually did what she's claiming, and from what you've told me, there's no physical evidence connecting you to her property. No witnesses, no DNA, no security footage. Unless you confess to someone or there's something you're not telling me, this case is going to be weak. I didn't confess to anyone except my wife, and spousal privilege would protect that, right? Generally, yes. But Frank, I have to ask you directly. Did you do what she's claiming? I hesitated. Rebecca was my lawyer. Anything I told her was protected by attorney-client privilege. Yes, I disconnected the monitor on her propane tank, but I was careful. I wore gloves. I went early in the morning when no one was around, and I didn't leave any evidence. Rebecca sighed deeply. Okay. Well, the good news is that without evidence, she can't prove it. The bad news is that defending against this lawsuit is going to cost you money even if we win. I'm going to file a motion to dismiss based on lack of evidence, but we'll need to go through discovery and depositions. How much is this going to cost me? Depends on how far she pushes it. If we can get it dismissed early, maybe $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees. If it goes to trial, could be $30,000 to $50,000. I felt sick. Even though I'd win, defending myself was going to be expensive and stressful. Over the next few months, I was deposed by Linda's attorney, an aggressive younger guy who tried to catch me in inconsistencies. I stuck to my story. I had no involvement with her propane system. I had no specialized knowledge about propane monitoring equipment. And I had no reason to vandalize her property since the HOA had already backed down on the van issue before her propane problems occurred. That last point was actually in my favor. Harold had told me the HOA was reconsidering the policy before Linda's propane ran out, so I had less motive than Linda was claiming. It wasn't true that I'd known about that at the time, but the timeline helped my case. Linda's attorney tried to establish that I had the means, motive, and opportunity. I countered that thousands of people had the opportunity since her propane tank was in an unsecured side yard, that I had no specialized knowledge of propane systems, and that my motive disappeared once the HOA dropped the issue. The discovery process revealed that Linda had no evidence beyond suspicious timing. No security footage showed anyone near her property. No physical evidence tied me to the scene. No witnesses saw anything. Her entire case rested on the coincidental timing and her belief that I was the most likely person to have done it. Rebecca filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that Linda couldn't meet the basic burden of proof required for her claims. We had a hearing in front of a judge in September. Linda's attorney argued that the circumstantial evidence was sufficient to let a jury decide. Rebecca argued that without any direct or physical evidence, the case was purely speculative and shouldn't be allowed to proceed. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Sullivan, reviewed all the materials and heard arguments from both sides. Then she delivered her ruling. While I understand the plaintiff's suspicions, suspicion is not evidence. The plaintiff has failed to present any concrete evidence connecting the defendant to the alleged vandalism. The timing, while suspicious, is not sufficient on its own to establish liability. Motion for summary judgment is granted. Case dismissed. I almost collapsed with relief. Linda's attorney immediately stated they would appeal, but Rebecca told me not to worry. Appeals based on evidentiary rulings like this rarely succeed. It's over, Frank. The legal fees had cost me $12,000 by the time everything was finished, but at least I didn't have to pay Linda anything. She had to pay her own attorney fees, which I imagined were substantial. After the case was dismissed, I ran into Linda one last time at the grocery store. We were in the same aisle, and there was no way to avoid each other. She looked at me with an expression that combined hatred, frustration, and resignation. "You won," she said simply. "There was nothing to win, Linda. I didn't do what you accused me of. We both know that's not true. But you were smart enough not to leave evidence. Congratulations. Even if I had done it, which I'm not saying I did, maybe you should think about why someone might have been driven to that point. You abused your power. You harassed me and tried to damage my business over a van that wasn't bothering anyone. You blocked me in and tried to tow my property. Actions have consequences. "So do yours," she said quietly. "I'll never be able to prove what you did, but I know. And I hope it was worth it to you, knowing that you caused that much damage and suffering over a petty dispute." She walked away before I could respond. I stood there in the cereal aisle, thinking about her words. Was it worth it? Honestly, I still wasn't sure. The legal battle had cost me $12,000 and months of stress. Linda had suffered much more, but she'd also been the instigator of the whole conflict. If she'd just been reasonable from the start, none of it would have happened. I went home and told Sarah about the encounter. She listened without commenting, then said, "I'm glad it's over. But Frank, promise me you'll never do something like that again, no matter how justified you feel." "I promise," I said, and I meant it. The whole experience had taught me that revenge, even when it feels justified, comes with its own costs. Linda stepped down as HOA president a month later, citing personal reasons. Harold Chen took over and proved to be much more reasonable and collaborative. The neighborhood settled into a peaceful routine. My van sat in my driveway without controversy. I built my business and paid off the legal fees over time. Every now and then, I drive past Linda's house and remember that cold February morning when I disconnected her propane monitor. I'd think about the burst pipes, the water damage, the displacement, the trauma. And I'd think about how she'd blocked my van, threatened my business, and abused her position of power. I never admitted to anyone else what I'd done. Sarah knew, but we never discussed it again. Rebecca suspected but never asked directly again after that one conversation. The truth remained buried, protected by lack of evidence and the passage of time. Years later, Sarah and I ended up moving to a different city when she got a job offer that was too good to pass up. As we were packing, going through old files, I found the original HOA violation notice Linda had sent me about my van. I stared at it for a moment, remembering everything that had followed. "You keeping that as a souvenir?" Sarah asked, seeing what I was looking at. "No," I said, and tore it in half, then in quarters, then tossed it in the recycling bin. "I'm done with all of that. Our new house wasn't in an HOA. That was one of our requirements when we were house hunting." I'd learned my lesson about giving a group of neighbors legal authority over my property. My van now sat in a garage attached to a workshop I'd built, away from any prying eyes or arbitrary rules. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Linda. Whether she recovered from the financial and emotional toll of that winter. Whether she ever moved past her suspicions about what I'd done. Whether she learned anything about wielding power more responsibly. But mostly, I just moved on. I built my business, lived my life, and tried to be a better person than I'd been that February morning when anger and frustration drove me to sabotage my neighbor's propane system. Looking back now, with the clarity that comes from distance and time, I can acknowledge that what I did was wrong. It was vindictive, potentially dangerous, and caused damage far beyond what Linda had done to me. But I also understand why I did it. When you feel powerless against someone abusing their authority, when you're being harassed and threatened despite doing nothing wrong, the desire to strike back becomes overwhelming. The whole experience taught me several lessons. First, HOAs can be tyrannical organizations that give petty people too much power. Second, revenge feels satisfying in the moment but comes with long-term costs, both financial and emotional. Third, standing up for yourself is important, but how you do it matters. If I could go back and do things differently, I'm not sure I would. That probably makes me a bad person, or at least a flawed one. But I'm honest enough to admit that part of me still feels like Linda got what she deserved. She learned that actions have consequences, that you can't just bully people without risking retaliation. And me, I learned that I was capable of more than I thought when pushed far enough. That realization was both empowering and unsettling. It made me more careful about how I treated others, more aware of how my actions might affect people, more conscious of not becoming the kind of person who needs to be taught a lesson. My business continued to thrive over the years. I developed a reputation not just for quality work, but for standing up for small business owners against unreasonable regulations and restrictions. Other people who ran businesses from home would sometimes reach out to me for advice on dealing with their own HOAs. I'd share what I'd learned, always emphasizing the legal route, always encouraging them to get proper legal representation, never mentioning the darker path I'd taken. One guy, another delivery driver who lived in a different HOA-controlled neighborhood, told me his HOA president was threatening to fine him for his truck. I gave him Rebecca Torres's contact information and told him to fight it properly. He did, and he won without any property damage or lawsuits. That felt good, like maybe some positive had come from my negative experience. Sarah and I eventually had kids, 2 boys who are now in elementary school. I teach them about standing up for themselves, about not letting bullies push them around, but also about doing things the right way. I hope they never find themselves in a situation where they feel justified in doing something ethically questionable, but if they do, I hope they make better choices than I did. The commercial refrigeration business has been good to me. I expanded over the years, hired employees, bought more vans. All of them park wherever they want when they are at home, because I made sure to only hire people who either own their homes outright or live in HOA-free neighborhoods. I'm not subjecting anyone who works for me to that kind of harassment. Every winter, when the temperature drops and the cold becomes dangerous, I think about that February. I think about Linda waking up to a cold house, unable to get emergency propane service, having to pack up and leave while her pipes froze and burst. I think about the sound they must have made when they ruptured, the water flooding through her walls and floors, the damage spreading while she was away. And I think about my van, blocked in my driveway, Linda's smug face, the threatening notices, the attempted towing, the abuse of power. I think about Officer Martinez telling her she couldn't block me in, about her doing it anyway through fees and regulations. I think about the injustice of it all. On balance, was what I did justified? I honestly don't know. I've wrestled with that question for years without arriving at a definitive answer. What I did caused real harm, significant financial damage, and emotional distress. But what Linda did was also harmful, just in a different way. She was trying to hurt my livelihood, cost me money, and assert dominance through an abuse of power. Maybe neither of us was right. Maybe we both got what we deserved. Maybe that's just how life works sometimes. People hurt each other, consequences follow, and everyone has to live with what they've done. I never did anything like that again. Never sabotaged anyone, never took revenge, never let anger drive me to damage someone else's property. That one time was enough to teach me that the cost, both internal and external, was too high. I found other ways to deal with conflict, legal ways, healthy ways, productive ways. But I also never forgot what I was capable of when pushed far enough. That knowledge stays with me, a reminder that even ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they feel they have no other choice. It's made me more empathetic to others who make bad decisions out of desperation or anger, more understanding of how good people can do bad things. The HOA at Meadowbrook Heights eventually dissolved entirely. Years after I'd moved away, I heard through former neighbors that the legal costs of multiple disputes, combined with declining interest in serving on the board, had led residents to vote to disband the association. The neighborhood apparently functions just fine without it, with people maintaining their properties out of pride rather than fear of fines. Linda apparently moved away too, though I don't know where or when. Someone told me she'd gotten divorced and relocated to Arizona, but I never verified that information. I hope she's doing well, wherever she is. I hope she learned something from the experience, just as I did. My relationship with Sarah weathered the whole ordeal, though it added stress we didn't need. She never quite looked at me the same way after I told her what I'd done. There was a wariness there that hadn't existed before, an awareness that I was capable of deception and retaliation. But we worked through it, went to couples counseling, rebuilt trust. We're solid now, stronger for having survived that test. The legal fees I paid to defend against Linda's lawsuit were ultimately worth it, not just because I won, but because they served as a form of accountability. I'd caused damage worth much more than I paid in attorney fees, but at least there was some financial consequence for my actions. It felt more balanced that way. I never told my kids the story. Maybe when they're older, when they're adults who can understand moral complexity and ethical gray areas, I'll share it with them. Or maybe I won't. Maybe some things are better left as private lessons, mistakes that shape us without needing to be broadcast. What I can say definitively is this: HOAs attract a certain type of person, and those people often abuse the limited power they're given. If you're going to live in an HOA-controlled property, read every word of the covenants before you buy. Understand what authority you're granting to your neighbors. And if you serve on an HOA board, remember that you're dealing with people's homes and livelihoods. Wield that power carefully, reasonably, and with empathy. As for revenge, it's a dish best not served at all. Find legal ways to fight back. Hire a good attorney, document everything, file complaints, pursue proper channels. It might cost more and take longer, but you'll sleep better at night. The short-term satisfaction of retaliation isn't worth the long-term cost to your conscience and your peace of mind. I've lived with what I did for years now, and while I've made peace with it, I've never forgotten the weight of that choice. Every action creates ripples that spread far beyond what we can see or predict. Linda's harassment created ripples that led to property damage and lawsuits. My retaliation created ripples that affected my marriage, my conscience, and my self-image. The day we finally closed on our new house, HOA-free with a proper garage for my van, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in years. No more walking on eggshells, no more worrying about arbitrary rules, no more dealing with power-hungry neighbors. Just simple home ownership, the way it should be. I still run my commercial refrigeration business. I still drive a van with my company logo on it. I still park it wherever I want, and nobody can tell me otherwise. That freedom is worth more to me now than it would have been before I went through the HOA nightmare. I appreciate it every single day. And every winter, when the cold settles in, and I'm making sure my own heating system is running properly, I think about propane tanks and monitoring systems and burst pipes. I think about how quickly things can spiral out of control, how conflict can escalate from a parking dispute to property damage to lawsuits. I think about responsibility and consequences and the price of revenge. Most of all, I think about how I never want to be in that position again, either as the victim of harassment or as someone driven to retaliate. Life's too short for that kind of stress and conflict. There are better ways to solve problems, healthier ways to deal with difficult people, more productive ways to spend energy and time. That's the real lesson from my story. Not that revenge is sweet or justified, but that it's costly and complicated. That standing up for yourself is important, but how you do it matters. That power, even small power like running an HOA, can corrupt people and bring out their worst impulses. That we all have a choice in how we respond to injustice, and those choices define who we are. I made my choice that cold February morning. I lived with the consequences, both the ones I anticipated and the ones I didn't. And I emerged from the experience changed, hopefully wiser, definitely more aware of my own capacity for both resilience and recklessness. Frank Yates, refrigeration specialist, HOA survivor, and someone who learned the hard way that the best revenge is simply living well and moving on.